Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today you've brought us some really interesting material. It's all focused on, well, what makes successful entrepreneurs really tick?
That's right. It centers around a TED Talk transcript by John Mullins, exploring what he calls these counter-conventional mindsets.
Counter-conventional, I like that. So we're looking at how these innovators think maybe differently than, say, big established companies.
Exactly. Or even differently from what you might learn in, traditional business school strategy courses.
Okay.
So the mission really is to pull out the key insights. How do they think differently? And maybe more importantly, what opportunities does that open up?
And the source material gives us a great starting point, right? Linda Weinman.
Yes, lynda.com. The source uses her as kind of the poster child for these mindsets.
Tell us that story again, briefly. It started small, didn't it?
Very small. Back in '95, she's teaching graphic design, gets the domain name lynda.com. And initially, the source says it was just her personal sandbox.
A sandbox, like for playing around.
Yeah, experimenting with new digital tools, Photoshop, Illustrator, that sort of thing, and showcasing her students' work. Pretty simple stuff.
But then something clicked.
Around 2002, yeah. She saw much bigger potential. Decided to move all her teaching online onto the site.
And that turned into?
Well, fast forward, it became LinkedIn Learning. Sold to LinkedIn for, get this, $1.5 billion.
Wow. Okay. So her journey really embodies these unusual ways of thinking the source talks about.
Perfectly, according to the material.
Okay, so before we dive into the how, let's just clarify. When the source says mindset, what exactly are we talking about?
Good question. The talk defines it as, like, your underlying attitudes, your habits, thoughts, those mental inclinations.
So the things that kind of predetermine how you react.
Exactly. How you respond to opportunities, to challenges. They're almost like your default settings. And the six we're going to look at, the source argues, run completely counter to typical best practices in big companies.
Fascinating. Okay, I'm ready. What's the first counter-conventional mindset?
All right, the first one sounds simple, but it's powerful. It's, yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Okay, how is just saying yes counter-conventional? Seems positive, right?
Well, think about basic strategy in big firms.
Yeah.
Strategy 101 is often stick to your knitting.
Right. Focus on your core competencies. Don't get distracted.
Exactly. Define what you do well, invest there. And if something comes along that's outside that box, the default response is often, no, sorry, that's not what we do. It's about focus through exclusion.
But entrepreneurs, like the example in the source, Arnold Correa from Brazil.
Yes, at Mo Digital. He apparently breaks this rule constantly. The source says he'd already reinvented his event business twice. Then a huge customer comes along.
The one with 260 stores.
That's the one. They wanted him to broadcast training events live via satellite across Brazil.
Okay, that sounds complex, especially if he's just doing event management.
Right. The source says he knew absolutely nothing about satellite tech. He'd never even operated outside São Paulo.
A typical company might run screaming.
Probably. But Arnold, his mindset was different. He just said, yes, we could do that.
And did he?
He got it done. According to the source, he figured it out.
Wow. Okay. And the story continues. Right. Walmart.
Yeah, later Walmart wanted screens on their sales floors for advertising. Again, totally different from his original business.
And he said,
yes, we can do that. The source points out he fundamentally reinvented his business 4 different times over the years, just by saying, yes, we can, when a customer asks for something outside his comfort zone.
So that willingness, driven by a customer need, lets entrepreneurs pivot and find new markets.
Absolutely. Instead of being boxed in, they adapt and learn. It's incredibly effective.
Okay, that leads nicely into the second mindset, because this one seems to challenge how businesses even start thinking about innovation.
Right. This one is called problem first, not product first logic.
Problem first. That feels different because, you see big companies focusing so much on their existing products.
Definitely. The source gives examples like Tide changing the color of the speckles in the detergent. Or Coca-Cola with all its versions.
Oh, yeah. Classic. Diet, cherry, vanilla, new Coke, which was a bit of a disaster.
Right. And the source presents these as mostly incremental tweaks, making the product slightly different, maybe calling it new and improved, but not really solving a deep-seated problem.
So entrepreneurs flip that. They start with the problem.
That's the idea presented here. They find a significant pain point first. The example is Jonathan Thorne. He had developed some kind of silver-nickel alloy technology.
Okay, fancy alloy. What's the problem?
Well, he identified an issue with surgical forceps. Apparently, they can stick to human tissue during surgery.
Oh, yikes. The source mentions a facelift example. Imagine the instrument snagging.
Right. Frustrating for the surgeon, potentially impacting the result. But then it gets even more critical. Think neurosurgery, brain or spine surgery.
You absolutely do not want instruments sticking there. Every cell counts.
Precisely. So Thorne initially thought plastic surgeons might want his nonstick forceps. But the business didn't really take off.
So he pivoted, using this mindset.
Exactly. He looked for a bigger, more painful problem his tech could solve. And he found it with neurosurgeons. Sticking forceps in that context. It's a critical issue.
So by focusing on solving that specific high-stakes problem,
He built, as the source says, a fantastic business. Eventually sold it to Stryker, made himself and his investors very happy.
it really shows that fixing a genuine pain point creates much stronger pull than just, slightly improving something people already have.
Exactly. People will pay to have real problems solved. Which connects us to the third mindset.
Which is?
Think narrow, not broad.
Okay, now that sounds completely backwards. Big companies always want the biggest market possible, right? Total addressable market, moving the needle. Why think narrow?
Well, think about it from a startup perspective. Trying to be everything to everyone right at the beginning, it's often impossible. You spread yourself too thin. The classic example the source uses is Nike, Philip Knight, and Bill Bowerman.
Right, the founders. So what was their initial market? It wasn't everybody who wears shoes.
Not at all. According to the source, it was incredibly narrow. Phil Knight was a distance runner himself. Bill Bowerman was his coach.
And they saw a specific problem for distance runners.
Yeah. Shoes back then were mostly designed for sprinters, for smooth tracks. But distance runners, they're on country paths, dirt roads.
Uneven ground, sticks, rocks, ankle sprains waiting to happen.
Exactly. Plus the pounding, mile after mile. Shin splints were a huge issue.
So their focus wasn't just better shoes, it was better shoes for distance runners.
Specifically, the source details what they needed: better lateral stability for the uneven ground, a wider footbed, definitely more cushioning for the shin splints, and lighter weight, because ounces matter over miles.
So they obsessed over that niche.
Totally. They developed the skills, designed for those specific needs, figured out importing from Asia, got elite distance runners to actually wear the shoes.
And then they expanded.
Only then. After they really understood and dominated that narrow segment, then they started looking at other sports. Tennis with John McEnroe, basketball with Michael Jordan, and eventually became the global giant they are today.
So thinking narrow lets you build deep expertise and a solid base first, like a beachhead.
Precisely. You establish a stronghold before you try to conquer the world.
Okay, makes sense. So you found a problem for a narrow audience. How do you actually fund the solution? That leads us to mindset number 4, right? About cash.
Yes, this one's about cash flow, asking for the cash and riding the flow.
Riding the float. Sounds intriguing. How does this counter conventional wisdom?
Well, standard finance, like in B school, teaches you to do detailed ROI analysis, right? Project cash flows out for years before you commit serious money.
Sure. And big companies often have plenty of cash anyway.
Often awash in cash, as the source puts it. It even mentions Merck having so much cash they used it for buybacks and dividends because they couldn't find enough R&D to soak it up.
But for an entrepreneur,
Cash is totally different. It's not surplus, it's lifeblood. You need it just to keep the lights on to build the thing.
and the source uses a pretty big example here, Elon Musk and Tesla.
One of the most famous, yeah. Their grand plan was always ambitious. Sports car first, then cheaper car, then mass market car to dent emissions. But Musk's immediate need,
Cash now.
get calf now. That was a tactic, according to the source. So they held this roadshow.
Targeting who?
Wealthy, eco-conscious folks, people who thought owning the next big thing was cool. But the key was the ask.
It wasn't just a pre-order, was it?
No way. The source emphasizes this. They sold 100 Tesla Roadsters, $100,000 each, cash on the barrelhead, paid tonight.
$100,000 up front before the car was even built.
Exactly. That instantly generated $10 million in cash, customer
Yeah.
cash. They were using that money, riding the float, to actually fund the development and initial operations.
Wow. And this wasn't just a one-time trick.
No, the principle carried through. Years later, the Model 3, when they announced it, almost 500,000 people put down a $1,000 deposit.
500,000 times 1,000. That's $500 million.
Right. Instant cash flow. Before they really ramped up engineering, tooling, factory setup. It's incredibly effective for providing that crucial upfront capital, using customer money to fund growth and reduce risk.
Using other people's money, but ethically, by delivering value later, which kind of connects to the fifth mindset.
It does, yeah. Mindset 5 is beg, borrow, but please, please don't steal.
Okay, the don't steal part is reassuring, but beg and borrow, how is this different?
Well, again, traditional finance is about your investment versus your future cash flow. This mindset is about creatively finding and using assets or resources that somebody else already owns.
Leveraging what's already out there.
Exactly. Especially if you can structure it so the owner benefits too. The example here is Go Ape.
The Treetop Adventure courses.
That's them. Tristram and Rebecca Mayhew saw a similar business in France, liked it, wanted to bring it to the UK. Simple enough idea.
But problem, you need trees. Lots of trees.
Right. And who has loads of trees in the UK?
The government. Forestry Commission.
Bingo. The UK Forestry Commission. And, conveniently, the commission was actually looking for ways to get more people visiting their sites.
Potential win-win.
So Tristan Becks went to them. According to the source, they proposed a deal. Let us build 5 sites on your land. Just 5, to prove it works.
And if it works.
Give us a 25-year exclusive deal for the rest of your suitable sites across the country.
Bold move. Did the commission go for it?
They did. The deal was struck. And the source points out, think about what Tristan Becks got. They essentially borrowed most of what they needed.
The trees.
The trees, the car parks that were already there, the toilet facilities.
But all they had to really invest in was the actual adventure stuff, the ropes and platforms.
Pretty much. Their kit, as the source calls it, put onto the borrowed trees. And today, Go Ape has, over 30 sites in the UK? Lots in the US, too. It's a huge success.
So that mindset drastically cuts down the upfront capital needed. You find partners whose assets you can leverage.
Exactly. It's about being resourceful and finding those mutually beneficial arrangements. Very clever.
It really lets you punch above your weight, financially speaking. Okay, that brings us to the sixth and final mindset. And this one sounds like it could be tricky.
Yeah, this one can definitely be challenging, especially viewed from a traditional corporate standpoint. It's don't ask permission.
Woo! Okay. That sounds a bit rebellious. How does that contrast with the norm?
Well, think about getting something genuinely new, something disruptive done inside a big company. What usually happens?
Lawyers get involved. Compliance. Regulations.
Right. You often have to navigate layers of legal review, regulatory checks.
Okay.
The source notes it's just really hard and slow to get a yes for something truly novel and very easy to get a no. Partly out of caution, fear of breaking rules, landing executives in trouble.
So entrepreneurs
Are often described as people who, in certain situations, just get on with it.
And the example the source uses here is pretty well known. Uber.
Yes. Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp. The source poses a hypothetical question. Imagine them going to the San Francisco city regulators right at the start.
And saying what? Hi, we want to start a taxi company.
But we don't actually own any taxis, and our drivers won't have medallions, and we'll set prices using algorithms.
Yeah, I can see the regulators maybe having some issues with that.
The source strongly implies the answer likely would have been no way, probably to protect the existing regulated taxi industry.
So the point the source is making is that sometimes entrepreneurs move forward when the rules are unclear.
Or maybe when the rules haven't even caught up with what technology makes possible. Think digital platforms connecting people in new ways.
Okay, but this feels like a really important point to be careful about. The source includes a major caution here, doesn't it?
Absolutely crucial. And the source material is very explicit about this. It states clearly that it does not condone many of the actions Uber took later on its journey.
Describing some as unethical, maybe even illegal.
Yes, the source uses strong language there. This Uber example is presented only to illustrate the don't ask permission principle, as it can sometimes play out when entrepreneurs are operating in genuinely gray areas or where regulations are ambiguous. It comes with that huge, vital caveat about ethics and legality directly from the source itself.
Right, so it's not a license to break rules wantonly.
Not at all. It's more about, in truly ambiguous situations where old rules don't quite fit, this mindset can allow for innovation and speed. But, as the source powerfully reminds us, that speed has to be balanced with ethical behavior and staying within the law. It's a fine line.
Okay, so we've covered these 6 mindsets, these ways of thinking that the source calls counter-conventional, break-the-rules mindsets.
Mindsets that, according to the talk, can potentially help change the world.
We had yes, we can, problem-first logic, think narrow, asking for the cash, beg and borrow, and finally, don't ask permission, with that important caveat.
A whole different way of looking at opportunities and obstacles.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the source leaves us leaves you, the listener, with a few